Hello, and welcome to Gothic Reviews. Today we're not reviewing these charming little skeletons as maybe seeming, but the Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker
versus the movie Hellraiser that it was based on.
It was a very gentle movie and a pretty good book too.
Gentle depends on what you call rough, but you know, we're unique individuals, so.
It was well developed, I should say, and specified.
The book and the movie were very similar in many ways. The difference is Clive Barker had a problem with, but I don't think they really changed the deep meaning of the book. There are some spoilers here because we're assuming that people watching this at least read or saw one or the other. So we will say that now. And if you're curious and you haven't watched either, there are spoilers. But, you know, there's so much in the book and the movie, so many layers, that we're not going to ruin it for you. The things we say aren't really, going to be enough to ruin it. There's just so many things to see or read depending on the movie or the book or both. We will talk about the Scarlet Gospels, which is the book that Clive Barker wrote to follow up Hellraiser, and I'm putting that kind of in quotes because we don't really feel that it should exist for so many reasons, or at least not to follow up Hellraiser. If it had different names and none of the Hellraiser characters were in it, that would be fine. But anyway, that's a different topic for a different day. But it really didn't seem like it matched the book, but I think the first book did. Hellbound Heart had a lot of the same characters. A few names were changed. The guy was Larry in the movie, and he's Rory in the book. His friend Kirsty in the book is his daughter Kirsty in the movie. He has the infamous brother Frank in both, and the wife Julia, who's kind of like a cold fish that he seems to adore, and she's supposed to be pretty or whatever. But in both, I never really understood the appeal of her character.
Yes, it seems like because she poses herself as above, to some extent he is attracted to the image of having somebody who should be above his station, than more than to the person themselves, the real person inside.
The guy wanting to get a girl that he thinks is better than him, even if she's not, specifically.
Yeah, it's like she plays the image. She, to an extent, despises Kirsty.
But he feels that she's better. But she's not.
Yeah.
And in the book, I think she didn't like the friend Kirsty, and in the movie she didn't seem to like the daughter Kirsty, and she was put more in the evil stepmother role. A different stereotype. In the book, Kirsty was an interesting character, but you know how you can carry across certain subtleties when reading that are harder to bring across in dialogue and gestures in a movie. I think that's why a lot of the changes in Hellbound Heart from the book Hellbound Heart to Hellraiser were made, that Clive Barker was unhappy about. But, you know, if he would just pull his head out of his rear, he would see that certain things you can't, as an author, I understand that you can't translate certain written descriptions into and carry it over to the screen as well. And I think that the changes that were made did make it easier to follow, easier to understand. And I think Kirsty was a stronger character in the movie than she was in the book. Or at least, I should say, I think Kirsty was a stronger character in the movie than she would have been had they tried to transpose her book character into a movie character. Because she had some interesting subtleties that made her a strong character in the book too, just a different kind of strong, like those girls that seem mousy and timid, but they're kind of really spitfires underneath when it comes down to it, and she seemed to be like one of those. But I don't feel that it, that was more subtle or descriptive dialogue. I don't think it would have come across as well in the movie. So I think the changes that were made were kind of necessary for the screen, and I think they made it really good. Certain characters, like the main Cenobite Pinhead, of course, I think was made even more brilliant on the screen. He was okay in the book. He was very subtle. I think the Cenobites were all subtle yet disturbing, but I don't think Clive Barker has the grip on creepy subtle that Ramsey Campbell does. Clive Barker usually just skips to sicking you out. So when he tries to do subtle, it's okay. But like Ramsey Campbell, it's Campbell, although it said Campbell. They called him England's answer to Stephen King and then some, and I'll definitely say then some because it takes a lot to scare us, and he scares me. But he's so subtle. He'll just like get in your imagination. It's like he doesn't say that much. He can just talk about little spider webs, and you're like, oh my god. And like spider webs aren't really scary, but it's just the way he does it and the things he puts into that specific one. And like, I'm not going to get on a Ramsey Campbell topic, but he's just a good horror writer, so check him out. Nazareth Hill was my favorite book, but all of his stuff is pretty good. But the point is, Clive Barker doesn't have that gift of subtle, so I think he tried to make the Cenobites subtly creepy. I don't know that he succeeded. I enjoyed them because I saw the movie first. A million times. But I think the Cenobites were done better in the movie. They were carried across more clearly.
And of course, Pinhead received most of the lines that others would say apparently in the books. They were given to him instead, and the actor Doug Bradley delivered them perfectly. Because of his theatrical preparation, he has that sonorous voice that probably nobody else that I could think of all the character actors could carry across as well. Except maybe like, I don't know, like some would argue that, but maybe Robert Englund, but...
Freddy's great. I mean, as Freddy, I think they're a match. Like the two horror guys that I don't want to mess with are Freddy and Pinhead. Like,
yeah,
you know, Jason and Michael. I mean, they're cool, but they're not really going to scare me. Like, just go away. But you know, yeah, you don't cross Freddy, you don't cross Pinhead. Yeah.
So I think that was a brilliant, very lucky choice. If it wasn't deliberate, it was very lucky indeed. But I think it was deliberate too because Clive Barker worked with Doug Bradley, and that worked out perfectly. So he delivered all the Pinhead lines perfectly, and they put Pinhead in the center, and I think to an extent he deserved it because even though there were very nice Cenobites in Hellbound Heart, they didn't really get enough screen time. So because of that, it was harder to highlight them, even though they did have their coolnesses, especially the mysterious engineer that tantalizes the imagination but doesn't show up a lot.
Yes, I was about to say the engineer was really interesting to me, and it's too bad that Clive Barker did not pursue that in his writing. They did sort of pursue it later in the movies, but not as much as I would have liked either. So it's kind of too bad that he whines about the things he didn't like that were actually improved and then ignored the really good things that he actually came up with that he didn't pursue. He didn't seem to appreciate those enough and continue with them. The engineer was definitely brought out more in the book. And some of the other Cenobites were mentioned, especially even female Cenobites that we didn't see as much in the movies. But, you know, they weren't really developed. So how are the movies supposed to develop them when the author didn't bother? They just kind of like, oh, that would have been interesting if he had actually done something with it kind of thing. Did you get that impression?
Yeah, usually that kind of thing requires lots of instructions to actors and directors and everybody else, and apparently George Martin can do it really well because he has experience, but probably enough writers don't know how to convert the experience from book play to screenplay type of thing.
And he really didn't say enough about them for other people to have as much to work with. So Pinhead got the main role, and I think he deserved it, and the actor was brilliant. He's still around, but he's not doing Pinhead now, so...
And he said about it justifiably, like apparently he feels betrayed that he wasn't allowed to play it in the remake, the very last Hellraiser movie that was made by the studios to keep their copyright. They didn't have time for him to prepare, so they didn't invite him, and that's a shame.
Well, I thought he got old, like that Robert Englund, and he didn't want to do it or something.
That's at first what I heard, but apparently they revisited it, and he said that he felt really sickened that he saw somebody else playing Pinhead.
I didn't think they did well. I mean, it was a good movie, the last Hellraiser, which we'll cover eventually too. It was a good movie, but you know, with a different Pinhead, it just didn't sound right. Like it wasn't as good, and I was very disappointed. And really, he doesn't do any like crazy stunts like Robert Englund does. So when I first heard the rumor that he just got too old to do it, I'm thinking, well, how? I mean, he doesn't have to do that much, and his face is all covered with pins, so they can't really see how old he is.
Yeah, and he still looks very hale. If anything, he might have less health issues to an extent than Robert Englund, who had some injuries. So I think Doug Bradley could have delivered it, and I think the plot was really well done in the last Hellraiser. It was consistent within the Hellraiser universe. Just the fact that somebody else, an actor who doesn't have as much of a sonorous voice, who does not capture our mind as much as Pinhead we're used to, that is a shame. That Doug Bradley could have still done it just as well.
Doug Bradley was Pinhead. It is Pinhead, and you know he makes it Pinhead. But that's why Pinhead was interesting in the book, but mainly because we knew him. And in the book, actually, he wasn't called Pinhead. He was described as a Cenobite with jeweled pins stuck all over his face, but you know, you kind of can get that that's Pinhead, like pins all over, like there was no other.
Yeah, Pinhead was apparently a nickname given by the fans or the movie crew, and it stuck through the movie production, so it was delivered by the movie, not by the books. And he was technically identified before and later, according to Clive Barker, as a hell priest or high priest. Or
I didn't notice him being called that in Hellbound Heart.
No, he wasn't called it there, but...
well, that was the book they were using, and he didn't... Clive Barker didn't like that, so he had a hissy fit, and he did call him the Hell Priest in his next book, which has not been released till later. That was the one we're going to review later, called The Scarlet Gospels, but in the first book, he wasn't called anything. He was described. Each one was just described. The only one given a title was the engineer of the 5 Cenobites mentioned in the book, and so therefore... I don't think he needed to complain that he was given a name and hey, he's got a head stuck full of pins, Pinhead. Like,
yeah, it seems like pretty catchy. Even if it is, as Clive Barker thinks, it's undignified, I still think it's pretty memorable.
It's descriptive. I don't think it's undignified. It's descriptive. He didn't give him another name, so I think he needs to be quiet. And I think that he is such a frightening character, and I think Pinhead is such a... commanding character that it doesn't really matter what you call him, it's not going to demean him. He's not made into a joke. Everybody knows that Pinhead is a force to be reckoned with, and nobody's laughing.
I like that. That's a good estimate.
So, you know, I think that Clive Barker whining about what he's called is Clive Barker's ego. And it's not really worth the trouble he's giving it, the name or the ego. I think he created a good thing. I think the movie... people really contributed and added to that great thing, and I think he should have appreciated it more because it's been a huge success and it's got a huge fan base, so that should tell one something. But you know, there was a lot of similarities in the book, other than the changes that we listed. I don't really notice a lot of big changes from book to movie, from Hellbound Heart to Hellraiser. In the end, Kirsty was given the puzzle box by, as she's running away from the house, by the engineer, who kind of looks like, it just shows like he's this being with a head of light, like you mainly just see like a shadow of a person, but then he's like really blinding light, which is kind of interesting. But again, Clive Barker couldn't devote a lot of attention to that for whatever reason. And he kind of makes Kirsty the keeper of the puzzle box, which I thought was interesting, and again, I would love to have seen that developed even in another book. But his sequel, that we really will mention and talk about later in a different video, just kind of seemed like it sort of forgot the first book ever happened. And to me, that's not really a sequel.
True.
Like, oh, well, none of that really matters. We're just gonna... That's like, what, Old Testament versus New Testament in the Bible or whatever. Like, okay, well, that's not meant to offend anybody. It's just my personal opinion that I'm not going to expound on because everybody has their own. That's about Clive Barker and the Bible. So, has anybody else ever put those two together in a sentence?
Hey, Clive Barker probably did. He did call his second book Gospels, which
yeah. Well, they weren't my kind of Gospels.
And technically, Pinhead is a member of a theological order of the Cenobites, so I guess there is some biblical connotations there too. And Lord Leviathan is mentioned in some of the Hellraiser universe, so again, a biblical association of sorts.
And, you know, the Hell Priest is a title, not a name, so I don't think Pinhead contradicts the title Hell Priest that Clive Barker wanted to give Pinhead later.
True.
So do you notice any other major changes? I mean, it seemed to pretty much follow a lot of the stuff from the book and the movie. The movie seemed to follow it, you know, other than the changes I listed.
Yeah, it's like even that family dynamics is basically preserved. The relationships are similar to each other, with the main differences being how the book or how the movie got to them. The movie got to them by placing Kirsty in a direct relationship with Larry, where the book only in her dream world, in the sense of wishing to have a relationship with him more than really having it, but still otherwise them getting to the same path in different ways and establishing an interest in family dynamics or friendship dynamics in this case. They did deliver basically the same message.
And there might be some little differences for people who want to be nitpicky. I was just talking about major changes, like the way Frank disintegrates in the book and kind of falls apart while Kirsty's running out. I don't think it was shown that way in the movie.
No, even Frank's appearance was to an extent confused with flashbacks from the past in the movie, and I think the book had more time to develop it more consistently, continuously, sequentially, easier to follow.
Yeah, where you understand what's happening. That's the point of a book. It can do that with narration more clearly than when they're trying to put it into a movie. But, there was a few little differences, but generally the gist, I think, was carried over well, other than the changes that were listed. And then the movies continue on their own, and I think they go in a somewhat different direction than Clive Barker intended or liked, but I will also say I think it was a better direction, and I think he was limiting. And then later in his book that we really will do a different video on, I think he kind of had what I call a baby fit about it, which means he just kind of wrote a book constantly showing his behind, being rebellious and poking out his tongue. And it's like, this is, I got your name on it, dude. Do you mind this at all? And a lot of it was just kind of forgetting the other stuff and just kind of being, I think, vicious and spiteful through the whole book to just stuff that was done that made no sense.
But there were few interesting moments in that book too, and we will mention them as well in the review, so to make a full balanced picture.
Yes, we're tantalizing you to watch the next Hellraiser installment.
Yes.
Hellraiser-based installment, which we should say if we're talking about Clive Barker's book. But that is book versus movie, and for those of you who have actually seen neither, this is more geared to those. It's about a world. Oh, in the book, the guy who made the puzzle... the guy who made the puzzle box, his name was mentioned, and it was the same in the movie, but his story was never developed in the book like it was in the movie as the toy maker later. I think it was like Hellraiser 4, was it, or something? That developed it? Or?
Yes.
It's one of them. Anyway, we're going to go through
Bloodline was the one.
Yeah, and it developed, but in the book never did that. It just named him as the maker.
Yeah.
It never said if he was working with the Cenobites or not working with the Cenobites or anything. It just didn't go into that. But in the movie, there's a Chinese guy that gives Frank and other people the puzzle box in different movies. What is your pleasure, sir? Is what he says. I think is his famous line, right?
Yeah.
And in the book, it was named as a French guy who gave it to him.
Yes, by the name of Kershaw, which I guess the name is interesting, but it would be hard to make the character as memorable as if he were Oriental, I think.
Yeah, I like that. And I guess, again, I could have been more used to it in the movie, but it was just more interesting and intriguing for me. And the guy who gave him the box in the book didn't seem to be that important and wasn't really mentioned that much. And I think that I was always intrigued by the Oriental guy in the movie and wondered who he was and how he had the box and just what his story was. He was intriguing. He still is. But if you haven't seen either, the book and the movie are about this puzzle box, and when you solve it, you open the gates to hell, but it's a place run by the Cenobites where they promise you pleasure beyond all knowing. It's kind of like these people that get burnt out on everything and they just need more and more and more, so they are drawn to do this. And in the movies, actually, here's another difference, I think. In the movies, it's supposed to be like pleasure and pain, and you get both, and it's really twisted, like really twisted together, like kind of makes sadomasochism a joke. Just imagine somebody ending up with like stitched body parts everywhere, and just like, it's just like, heads and feet and arms, and it's pretty chaotic. It's a lot of like stuff they go through for this pleasure and pain. And the thing is, I think the book had Frank mainly saying there was no pleasure for him. He's like, maybe they thought it was pleasure, but I wasn't really getting any pleasure out of it. So in the book, it didn't seem like he was promised pleasure, but like he didn't get it.
And I saw another difference, maybe, that the book had more emphasis on mental anguish, memories of the past tormenting him, where enough of the torments shown in the movies are justifiably pleasures or pain of the flesh, because it's easier to introduce and represent it on the screen, I think.
That makes sense. His body was pretty messed up when he came back in both, so I think that it was probably assumed in the book that there was some physical stuff going on too, but it didn't really go into it.
Yeah.
I guess that was another one that Clive Barker was attempting to leave to the imagination and not painting as well of a picture as Ramsey Campbell does with subtlety. Clive Barker's like me. When I try to be subtle, I'm pretty direct with people and I can offend without meaning to and whatnot. But when I try to be subtle, I'm like throwing these hints and they're like wild balls and people don't get it and they don't know what I'm talking about. It's like, what are you trying to say? And I think that's like Clive Barker with his subtle writing. It's just like, nobody's getting it. So I think that's the deal. But for those of you who haven't read it or seen the movie, it's kind of like a puzzle box that opens a gateway to hell, and the Cenobites come through, and they're these demons, but they look really tormented. Like Pinhead has his face all with pins, and like different ones have different physical, like weird things.
Deformities.
Yeah, that it's not just like a person with a deformity, it's like really out there stuff. Again, we don't want to do too many spoilers, but and the people's lives that get drawn in by opening the puzzle box. You know, you get each movie shows their stories, and sometimes there are people that were in the books, or excuse me, the movies before, well, the first book, and the movies before that will reappear. But each person has a story and kind of a different reason why they're drawn to this puzzle box in each movie of Hellraiser, and why they open it, and I guess what triggers them to open it, what weaknesses would you say that draws them?
Yeah, it has lots of deep psychology in there. Certain lines even point in the movies to the fact that the puzzle box was always representative of the mystery. They were looking the mystery, sometimes of the self, which we covered some of it in the Hellraiser, the first movie review of 1987. But basically that's the beauty of this kind of horror, that it relies as much on psychology as it does on special visual effects.
Yes, we love the psychology of it, and that's why I really love Freddy too. But Pinhead will use everybody's weakness against them hard.
And that is a good concluding line that Pinhead would be proud of, I think.
Well, thank you. Do check out the book and the movie if you have not. If you've only seen one, check out the other. Leave us a note if you agree or disagree, and if you have any thoughts, because we're always interested in discussing both. And if you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, share, and stay tuned.